The arrival. The scream came first, sharp, wet, and brief, followed by the hollow clatter of a pail rolling against the cobblestone. By the time Reverend Alcott reached the well, the sound was gone. Only the echoes remained, bouncing between the fog and the chapel walls where the frost had begun to eat the paint off the Virgin's face. The smell hit next. Iron and salt. Not from the sea, Hollowvale was 20 miles inland, but from something freshly torn. When he peered over the rim, the moon caught something white at the bottom. It was not water. It was linen, and the shape beneath it was still moving. The village of the vanishing clock Hollowvale had only one road, and no one could ever agree who built it. The stones looked Roman, but the slope was too cruel for a Roman mind. At the top of that road, behind a gate that moaned like an animal, sat the Everton house, 3 stories of gray brick, its chimneys sighing black smoke that tasted like coal and something older. Every clock in Hollowvale stopped the night the Evertons returned. The villagers didn't need proof. They only noticed the silence. The baker's wife said she'd heard the hourglass in her parlor whisper her name when the sand ran out. They called it a haunting. But the Reverend, the one who'd found the shape in the well, called it a curse of blood. The return of Mr. Everton Edmund. Everton arrived at dusk, his carriage pulled by 2 black geldings slick with rain. He had been gone nearly a decade, long enough for his wife's grave to gather moss, long enough for rumors to take root. The villagers remembered him as a man of letters, not violence. But something in his face when he stepped out that night suggested both. His eyes were not old but wounded, and the girl beside him, pale, maybe 14, did not look at him as a daughter might look at a father. She looked as if she feared being left behind. Her name, he said, was Clara. He did not explain where she had come from, and no one asked, because in Hollowvale it was wiser to bury questions with the dead. The Reverend had drawn the linen from the well himself that morning. It had been wrapped around a child's doll, soaked in something too red to be water. No body, no witness, just the mark of small fingers on the rope, worn smooth from desperate clutching. When Mr. Everton passed him in the square later that evening, the Reverend felt the air shift, colder, thinner, as though the world itself were holding its breath. "Your house," the Reverend said carefully, "has been empty too long. Sometimes when walls forget warmth, they begin to remember what they've seen." Mr. Everton smiled the way a man does when he hears his own secret spoken aloud. "Then let them remember," he said, and walked away. Clara's room. The child's window faced the orchard, if you could call 3 dead trees an orchard. Clara spent hours there, fingers tracing frost on the glass. The maids whispered that she talked to someone in the orchard when the moon rose. Someone who answered. Once the cook claimed she saw 2 sets of footprints in the snow beneath her window, one small, one large, circling each other, ending at the roots of the middle tree. The next morning, that tree bled sap the color of rust. The servants asked to leave. Mr. Everton refused. Clara began humming hymns at dawn. By dusk, she'd hum lullabies no one recognized. When asked what she sang, she said, "It's what Mother taught me. She sings through the walls." The room of portraits. There was a room in Everton House no one entered, not since 1858. The east parlor, locked from the inside. Behind the dusted keyhole, portraits of the family line painted across generations, faces solemn and haunting. One night, Clara asked to see them. Her father stared for a long while before saying yes. They entered by candlelight. Her small hand trembled as she pointed at a young woman in a lace gown, pale eyes, hair pinned high, a faint scar under her left ear. "She's the one," Clara said. "The one who watches me." Mr. Everton's jaw tightened. "That's your mother," he whispered. "She's been dead for 10 years. Clara turned to him, eyes wide and unblinking. "No," she said softly. "She hasn't." The mirror that same night, the servants heard a crash from the east parlor. When they arrived, Mr. Everton was kneeling on the floor, holding shards of a shattered mirror. Blood ran from his palm, not from the glass, but from a cut on his lip as though he'd bitten through it. Clara stood beside him, calm as sleep. Her reflection, caught in the broken pieces, seemed older, her dress unfamiliar, her eyes too knowing. He whispered her mother's name. Clara smiled. "Do you still love her?" she asked. Her voice sounded wrong, too low, too even. He looked at her and something inside him broke. Because the way she spoke was exactly how his wife had spoken the night she died. The letter a week later, the Reverend received a sealed envelope on his chapel doorstep. No signature, only a short note written in trembling ink. The child knows. She remembers what she shouldn't. The house is turning her into something else. If she asks for vows, deny her. She already has a husband. That evening, the chapel bell began to toll on its own. 9 times, no wind, no hand. In the silence that followed, a girl's voice drifted through the fog outside. "Father," it said sweetly, "you forgot the ring." When the Reverend reached the gates of Everton House, the door stood open. Music floated from within, slow, deliberate, the kind played for a wedding. Through the crack of the door, he saw the candlelight flicker across lace and shadow. A man knelt before a girl in white, her veil shimmering like breath on glass. The air reeked of lilies, funeral lilies, and when the groom lifted the veil, the Reverend did not scream. Because the face he saw beneath it was not Clara's, it was her mother's, and she was smiling. The mirror of the child, the morning. After the wedding, the next morning, no one spoke of what they had seen. The servants, those who remained, swore the chapel had been empty. No candles, no bride. No sound except for the faint tolling of a bell no longer hanging in the belfry. But the Reverend could still smell the lilies. He could still see in his mind the shimmer of lace, and he could not forget the look on Edmund Everton's face, the look of a man who had finally married his ghost. The portrait room, again. Clara was found the next day in the east parlor, sitting before the portrait of her mother. The light through the cracked window fell across her hair in thin, trembling lines. She held a mirror on her lap, one of the shards from the night before. She was humming again. When the housekeeper asked what she was doing, Clara said, "Mother says I must learn to smile like her. She says Father only loves that smile." Then she pressed the mirror to her cheek and smiled. Blood trickled down from the corner of her mouth, thin as thread. She didn't seem to notice. The Reverend's Journal extract, March 4, 1867. The man is unwell. He speaks of his wife as though she walks beside him, yet buries his daughter in silence. He forbids the servants to light candles in the east parlor, yet I see the glow there each night from my window. Last night, I swear upon the cross, I saw 2 shadows upon the curtains, one tall, one childlike, both moving in rhythm like dancers. When I called out her name, Clara, the candle went out. And the window smiled. The whispering glass it began with the mirrors. First the one in Clara's room, the glass fogging even when the fire burned low. Then the hall mirror by the stair, where servants saw their reflections blink when they did not. Finally, the great mirror at the end of the corridor, the one that had belonged to Mrs. Everton. Each night, Mr. Everton would stop before it, straighten his coat, and whisper, "I did not forget you." Clara would appear behind him sometimes, barefoot and silent. Once she reached for his hand in the reflection. He flinched, not because her touch startled him, but because in the glass her hand was older, not a child's at all. The song in the orchard. The orchard had no leaves that year, only bones of trees and frost. But on the night before the thaw, a song drifted through the branches. A woman's voice, soft and steady, singing an old vow hymn. The servants locked their doors. The Reverend prayed, and Clara went out barefoot into the cold. When she returned, her dress was damp with dew, and with something darker. She carried a ring. The next morning she wore it, gold dull with age. It fit her perfectly. When asked where she'd found it, she said, "Mother left it in the tree. She said it's mine now." The dinner that evening, Edmund ordered the table set for 3. He sat at one end. Clara sat at the other. The third chair remained empty. The candlelight flickered strangely that night, bending toward the empty seat as though drawn by breath. Halfway through the meal, Clara looked across the table and said, "Father, you forgot to kiss her good night." The fork fell from his hand. The candle hissed. And for just a moment, long enough for the butler to see, the empty chair sank slightly as if a weight had settled there. The child who dreamed of being a bride. The Reverend tried to reason with the girl. He brought her to the chapel, away from the house, away from her father. He told her stories of angels, of purity, of life before death. She listened politely, hands folded. Then she smiled. But she says I must take her place, Clara said. Father can't tell the difference. He never could. Her eyes gleamed with something not childlike, something rehearsed. And when the Reverend asked who she was, Clara whispered, "You'll see her soon. She likes you too." The father's confession late that night, Edmund came to the chapel. Rain dripped from his sleeves. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in years. "Reverend," he said quietly, "I know what you think, but you don't understand. She's not my daughter." The Reverend froze. "What do you mean?" "She was," Edmund continued. "Once, but when she looks at me now, I see her mother. The same eyes, the same voice, the same words she used the night she died." His hand trembled. "She remembers things she couldn't possibly know. Where we hid the letters, what she wore on our wedding day, even the way she—" He stopped, then whispered, "Sometimes when I close my eyes, I forget which one she is." The reflection that spoke that night, Clara stood before her mirror again. The candlelight shivered across her face. Behind her reflection, faint like a shadow through mist, stood a woman, hands resting gently on her shoulders. Clara whispered, "Will he love me now?" The reflection smiled, and though no one else heard, the mirror answered, "He already does." The Reverend's second journal entry, March 7, 1867. I hear laughter from the house at night, not the laughter of a child. Sometimes two voices, sometimes only one but layered, as though the same voice spoke twice at once. I found footprints again beneath her window. The small ones go out. The larger ones come back in, but no adult man has left the house in 3 days. I fear what that means. The servant's death in the morning, they found the butler at the base of the stairs, neck twisted, eyes open, mouth frozen, mid-scream. The only clue, a wedding veil tangled in his hands, the one that had belonged to Mrs. Everton. When the doctor examined him, he found faint bruises around his throat, shaped like small hands. Clara watched from the landing, her face blank. Then she turned and walked back to her room, humming again. That night, the Reverend broke into Everton House with a lantern and his Bible. He followed the music, Clara's humming, through the corridor, up the staircase past the locked door of the portrait room. It led him to the east parlor. Inside, Clara stood before the mirror, her reflection wearing the bridal gown. Her hands were pressed to the glass. Her lips moved. The reflection's lips moved too, but the words were different. Then in the glass, Edmund appeared beside her. Not behind her, but inside. He took the reflection's hand. The candle went out, and in the dark, Clara whispered, "Now we're all together." The mirror cracked, and the Reverend screamed. The Veil of Sanity, the house that breathes, he heard it before he saw it. A slow, steady exhalation rising through the walls. Not wind. Not the old groan of stone and timbers, but breathing. The sound pulsed faintly through the corridors of Everton House, like lungs inhaling the sins of the living. Reverend Alcott stood in the threshold of the east wing, lantern trembling in his grip. The flame wavered each time the house sighed. His prayers had stopped working 3 nights ago. Now he prayed without believing, and that he feared was the truest form of damnation. The drawing room, Clara sat cross-legged on the floor, tracing invisible circles into the dust. Her lips moved soundlessly. "Her shadow did not, Clara," he said softly. "Where is your father?" She lifted her eyes, vacant but aware. "In the mirror," she said. "Where you left him." The Reverend blinked. "I did no such thing." Clara tilted her head. "Then who did?" Her eyes shimmered with the faint gleam of candlelight, but there were 2 reflections in them, overlapping like a double exposure. One smiling, one watching. The hidden door behind the family portraits, the Reverend discovered a seam in the plaster, thin as a knife's edge. When he pressed, the wall gave way to a narrow stair descending into darkness. The air changed, damp, metallic. The smell of time kept too long in one place. He lit his lantern and descended. The steps were worn in the middle, not by mice or servants, but by years of quiet, deliberate passage. At the bottom, a door stood ajar. Inside, a small chapel, homemade, candle stubs in bottles, a kneeler darkened by sweat and tears, and above the altar, where the crucifix should have hung, was a painting. It was not Christ. It was Clara wearing her mother's veil. The journal, fragment 1, undated, written in uneven hand. He calls her by her name, yet it is not hers. He looks upon her face, yet it is not a child's. In the night she whispers vows she cannot know. I begin to wonder if sin is a sickness that can be inherited. The confessional. When he confronted Edmund the next day, the man was sitting at the window staring into the orchard. His skin had gone sallow, his lips dry as parchment. I only wanted to keep them both, Edmund murmured, but they kept changing places. Changing? He turned, eyes bright with fever. You think me mad. You think this is grief? But look for yourself, Reverend, look properly. He pointed to the glass. For a moment, the Reverend saw only the reflection of a man. Then as the wind shifted, he saw a woman behind him. Her fingers rested on Edmund's shoulders. Her eyes looked exactly like Clara's. The village rumors by now, Hollowvale had begun to whisper. The butcher's wife said she'd seen 2 Claras walking past the chapel, one barefoot, one in silk. A farmhand swore he heard wedding bells each night at 3, and the midwife claimed she saw Mrs. Everton's veil hanging in her window, dripping with rain, though the sky had been dry. The villagers avoided the road. Even the birds stopped nesting near the orchard. Something in the air made the living forget themselves. The letters in the wall in the hidden chapel, the Reverend found a small box sealed with wax. Inside were letters, all addressed to my dearest Edmund. The handwriting changed, elegant at first, then wild. One line burned into his mind. If our daughter dies, I shall live within her. You will not know the difference. Another, promise me eternity and I will return. The last letter was dated 1 week before her death, and the signature, T, had been rewritten over itself until the paper tore. The candle and the child that night, Clara appeared outside his room with a candle. Her white nightdress brushed the floor. Her hair hung in tangled waves. She smiled faintly. Mother says I should thank you. For what? He asked. For bringing him back to her. Before he could speak, she leaned forward and blew out the candle. The darkness swallowed the hall, but her face remained faintly glowing as if lit from within. The Reverend's journal, fragment 2. There is no child in this house. There is only the shape of one, filled by another. He believes he is her father. She believes she is his wife, and I no longer know which belief is worse. The breaking of the mind, the Reverend began to lose time. Hours vanished between blinks. He would wake standing in the orchard, or kneeling at the altar in the hidden chapel, with no memory of how he arrived. Once he looked down and found dirt beneath his nails, and a ring in his hand. Gold, faintly warm. He dropped it, trembling, and it rolled beneath the pew. When he reached for it, a small hand reached out from the darkness and placed it gently back in his palm. The hand was cold, and gone the next instant. The house without shadows. On the 7th night, the mirrors stopped reflecting. They showed only blankness and the shape of rooms, but no faces. Only the one in the east parlor remained alive. Clara stood before it, humming. Edmund behind her, pale and rigid. The Reverend entered quietly, whispering a prayer that dissolved before it left his lips. Father, she said, you came. I came to save you. Clara's smile deepened. Then save us both. Her reflection blinked, and when it opened its eyes, the Reverend saw his own face staring back. Mouth open, silent, praying. When he awoke, he was in a bed he did not recognize. The sheets were clean. The walls white. Outside, someone was singing. Clara's lullaby, slowed and mournful. A woman entered the room, her voice soft and steady. Good morning, Reverend. You've been ill, he blinked. Her face was familiar. Too familiar. Mrs. Everton? He whispered. The woman smiled. No, she said gently. Not anymore, she lifted her hand. A gold ring glinted on her finger, and in the window pane behind her. The reflection showed 3 people standing together, smiling. The house of the Vows, the night the walls remembered. Rain fell sideways that night, a storm that seemed to circle the house rather than pass over it. Lightning cracked open the sky and for a heartbeat, illuminated the orchard. Every tree bore something hanging from its branches. Not fruit. Not birds, veils, dozens of them, and white, drenched, twisting in the wind like shrouds. Each one bleeding faint light. Inside, the air pressed heavy against the lungs, and the house itself seemed to inhale. Every beam groaned. Every window fogged from the inside out. The Reverend Alcott prayed in the drawing room, but each word he spoke came back to him reversed, as though the house itself mocked his tongue. The bride's chair Edmund had locked himself in the east parlor. The servants said they could hear him whispering through the keyhole, Vows soft and trembling. Each time he spoke her name, the candles outside the room guttered. Clara sat at the piano playing one note again and again, middle C, until the strings began to fray. When the Reverend placed a hand on her shoulder, she froze mid-key and whispered, "Father, it's not a piano anymore." "What is it then?" he asked. She looked up and her eyes were glazed with tears. "A mouth," she said. "It's learning to sing." The smell of lilies, he found the smell first, faint but choking as if every flower from every funeral had been pressed into the walls. The scent led him to the cellar, where the brick was damp with something darker than moisture. There were petals scattered across the steps, crushed underfoot, mixed with hair, and streaked with wax. He realized with dread that the petals led not down but up. Something had come out of the ground. He followed the trail to the hall, and there, beneath the chandelier, lay a dress. A wedding gown, still warm. The house as witness, for the first time he noticed the walls changing. Portraits that once hung straight now tilted inward. Frames warped subtly, the faces inside them shifting as if under breath. Clara's mother, in her painting, was now turned slightly toward the Reverend's direction. Her mouth was open. He could not tell if she was speaking or screaming, and then, faintly from behind the wallpaper, came the sound of whispers, hundreds layered together. "Do you take this man?" The voices stopped. The walls exhaled, and the chandelier swayed without wind. The wedding table by midnight, Edmund emerged. He was clean-shaven, wearing the coat he'd worn the day of his wedding. He looked peaceful, too peaceful. He asked the servants to set the table again for 3. But this time only 2 chairs remained. Clara appeared in white lace, barefoot, lips pale. The Reverend tried to stop her, but Edmund raised his hand. "She is of age," he said quietly. "She remembers everything now." The candlelight flickered. The 3rd chair, the empty one, had vanished. The house that wrote its own scripture, in the chapel below. Words began to appear on the altar cloth, burnt into the fabric as if written by invisible flame. "What God joined once, no death shall part." The Reverend fell to his knees. "This is not divine," he gasped. "This is desecration." From somewhere above and through the ceiling came the echo of Clara's voice. "Then bless us anyway." He fled the chapel. But as he ran, the house shifted, doors rearranging themselves, halls bending into new geometry. The staircase led not upward but backward in time. The memory loop, when he reached the east parlor, the air shimmered as if through heat. And suddenly, everything was as it had been 10 years ago. Clara was an infant again in her mother's arms. Edmund knelt beside them, radiant with joy. The Reverend watched from the corner, heart pounding. "Bless this union," Edmund whispered. But when the mother lifted her face, it wasn't hers. It was Clara's. The baby in her arms was herself, crying, laughing, melting into shadow. The illusion collapsed, and the Reverend screamed, because the walls were pulsing with veins. The parish record entry dated March 14, 1867, author unknown. Tonight the bells rang though no one pulled the rope. The sky refused to take the moon, and every mirror in Hollowvale cracked at once. They say the Evertons renewed their vows, but the groom had no pulse, and the bride had 2 faces. The room of vows at the top of the stairs, a door glowed faintly with candlelight leaking from beneath. The Reverend pushed it open. Inside, Edmund and Clara stood facing each other. Between them, white a mirror covered in a bridal veil. Edmund held her hands. She looked neither alive nor dead, just resolved. He turned to the Reverend, smiling through tears. "She has chosen," he whispered. "She wants forever." The Reverend shook his head. "This is no marriage. It's possession." Edmund's smile widened. "Then let her possess me." The vow Clara began to recite the words, but not in her own voice. It was older and fuller, the same tone her mother had once spoken with echoing through the walls. "I, Clara Evelyn Everton, take thee, Edmund." Lightning flared. The veil lifted, and the mirror beneath it rippled like water. Edmund's reflection reached out. So did Clara's. Their hands touched the glass, and the Reverend saw, too late, that the mirror had no reflection of him at all. Only the two of them smiling, merging. The breaking point, he seized the Bible, shouting scripture until his voice fractured. The mirror quaked. The candles exploded in bursts of smoke. For an instant, the faces inside the glass twisted, merging, splitting, devouring. Then gone silence. The veil fell. Both Edmund and Clara were gone. The only thing left was their reflection, trapped, still holding hands, smiling endlessly inside the mirror's surface. The next morning, Hollowvale woke to birdsong for the first time in weeks. The Everton house stood quiet. The Reverend entered alone, exhausted, trembling. Every window was open, every portrait blank, every clock ticking again, except one. The great clock in the hall read 3:17, the exact minute the vows were spoken. And in the silence he heard a faint whisper from the mirror, "Your turn." He looked closer and saw his own reflection wearing the ring. The wedding that shouldn't be. The sound of breathing glass, the Reverend awoke to silence, the kind that hums like pressure behind the eyes. Every surface shimmered faintly as though coated in a thin layer of frost. He stood slowly, his breath misting in the air, and realized that his reflection was not moving. It smiled. He didn't. Then, from behind the mirror's surface, came a breath. Not wind, not his own. It was the sound of lungs pressed against glass. He stepped closer. The reflection's lips parted, and his own voice whispered back, "Bless me, Father, for I have become her." The mirror room, the east parlor, was no longer a room. It had become a corridor of mirrors stretching endlessly, each one reflecting a slightly different moment in time. In one, Clara was a child again. In another, she stood as a woman in lace, veiled and radiant, and in all of them, Edmund waited. Every mirror pulsed with light like a heartbeat beneath the surface. The Reverend reached out, and the mirror took his hand. It was warm, alive. The glass rippled like water, and he was pulled through. The world inside, the world beyond the mirror, was bright and colorless, a place of endless light without warmth. The ground shimmered like glass dust. The air vibrated with a low, unbroken tone, like the hum of a chapel organ played by unseen hands. Ahead, the Everton house stood again, perfect, untouched, eternal. Its doors were open. Wedding bells rang without sound. He stepped inside. The procession, they were waiting for him. Every portrait from the real world stood here as a person, watching from the pews, painted faces come to life, whispering the old vows. Clara walked down the aisle. Her veil dragged behind her, whispering like silk over bone. Edmund waited at the altar, his eyes hollow but soft with devotion. The Reverend felt his knees weaken. He tried to speak, but his voice dissolved into mist. Clara stopped halfway down the aisle. She turned toward him. "Father," she said sweetly, "you must finish the ceremony. You're the only one left who remembers the words." The unholy sacrament he refused. He dropped the Bible. It split open to blank pages of white, endless, bleeding light. Clara took his hand, pressed it to her chest. He felt no heartbeat, only echoes. She smiled. "Do you not see, Father? We are only what love refuses to let die." Edmund extended his hand to her. The air between them shimmered like heat above a grave. When their fingers touched, light burst across the hall, and the Reverend saw three shadows merge into one. The memory that isn't his, he was no longer standing in the chapel. He was standing in the orchard, but it was summer now, warm, alive. The trees were full of blossoms. A young woman laughed behind him, Clara's mother, alive again, twirling beneath a veil. Edmund held her waist. They were newlywed. The Reverend blinked and realized he was watching through Edmund's eyes. He tried to look away but couldn't. The memory wasn't his to control. When the woman turned and kissed him, her face shifted mid-breath, from the mother's to the daughter's. He screamed, and the world split like glass beneath his feet. The reflection's truth, he landed on a marble floor, bloodless, silent. Clara and Edmund stood above him, their faces luminous, not human, but remembered. "Do you understand now?" she asked softly. There was never a ghost. There was never a haunting. There was only what he could not let go. The Reverend crawled backward, trembling. "This is madness." "No," Clara whispered. This is love after it forgets how to die. The vows repeated. The altar rose from the ground, stone glowing, covered in lilies that wilted and regrew with each breath. Edmund turned toward the Reverend. "Marry us again," he said calmly. "This time it will hold." The Reverend clutched the cross at his neck. "No," he gasped. "I will not bind sin to eternity," Clara smiled. "Then you already have." And the lilies began to sing. The song of the dead. The petals opened like mouths, whispering fragments of hymns, backward and broken. The air filled with light. Every mirror in the room cracked inward, forming a circle around the altar. The sound was not pain, it was worship. Clara lifted her veil. Beneath it, her face shimmered between youth and decay, beauty and ruin, mother and child, when all forms of love impossible and complete. The Reverend shut his eyes. He prayed, but the words came out as vows. "I take thee." He froze. To have and to hold, he was saying them backwards. The wedding that shouldn't be. The bells returned, real now, deafening, tolling through the light. Clara took Edmund's hand. Their eyes locked, and in that moment every reflection in every mirror whispered the same phrase in unison, "Till death unmake us." The floor split open. The light swallowed the house, and the Reverend felt his body unravel, pulled between worlds, between truth and devotion. He screamed one final word, "Stop!" But the echo answered for him, "No." The aftermath, when the light dimmed, the house was empty. The chairs overturned, the mirrors shattered, and all but one. In its surface, the Reverend saw a chapel full of guests laughing, alive. Clara and Edmund danced slowly to a song only they could hear. The Reverend stood at the altar, smiling, officiating their eternal union. He reached for the mirror, and his reflection did not. The villagers found Everton House abandoned weeks later. The windows were intact, the furniture untouched. Only one thing remained in the east parlor, a mirror. Its glass perfectly smooth, and behind it, 3 faint silhouettes forever standing hand in hand. At dusk, if you stand close enough, the glass begins to fog from within. A whisper slips through the silver. "Father, your blessing." And if you stay too long, the mirror shows 4. The lost testimony of 1867, the ashes and the echo. The morning after the final storm, the world was silent. No birds, no wind, just the sound of dripping, water sliding down the cracked stones of Everton House, falling into the black soil below. The Reverend awoke face down in the chapel, lungs burning, his cassock stiff with dried blood. The Bible lay open beside him, its pages blank. Not torn, not burned, simply white, as though every word had been erased by light. He stood slowly, trembling, his reflection caught in a shard of mirror beside the altar. It blinked a moment too late. The Parish Inquiry, official transcript, March 29, 1867. Reverend Thomas Alcott under oath. Clerk, you claim no knowledge of the whereabouts of Edmund Everton or his daughter? Alcott, I claim nothing. I remember nothing past the tolling of the 9th bell. Clerk, yet you were found inside the chapel of their estate alone. Alcott, alone? That cannot be. They never leave. Clerk, who never leaves, Father? Alcott, the vows. The clerk struck the words from the record. The transcript ended there. The mirror in custody. The Everton mirror was confiscated and placed in the crypt beneath Hollowvale Church. The record states, object bears no reflection under sunlight, emits faint warmth when touched. When the bishop visited, he ordered the crypt sealed. Not evil, he whispered to his aide, just unfinished. Within a week, the aide vanished. A mirror was later discovered in his quarters. On its surface, the faint outline of a child in a veil. The Reverend's final entry, recovered from his diary, page water-damaged, handwriting unstable. It is no haunting. The mirror is their church. Every vow ever spoken wrong seeps through its glass and waits to be repeated. I have begun to see them at dusk. Edmund smiles. The girl hums. And sometimes when I blink, I am back inside, officiating again forever mid-sentence. I no longer ask for mercy, only for silence. The forgotten parish Hollowvale withered within a decade. The wells dried. The church collapsed after lightning struck its steeple. The last villager to leave swore that every window of Everton House still gleamed, though the roof had fallen in. He said the mirrors inside faced each other now, so that light could never escape. No one rebuilt the house. But on moonless nights, travelers say they hear a faint melody from the valley, two voices weaving through the wind. What God joined once, no death shall part. The Lost Testimony, excerpt from a letter found in the archives of St. Bartholomew's Abbey, sealed since 1870. To whoever discovers this in the Hollowvale case was not possession, it was consummation. The girl did not inherit the mother's ghost. The father became it. The ceremony completed itself. The priest who blessed them was bound in reflection until his faith fractured into obedience. The mirror is the covenant. The glass remembers. Do not touch it, for it does not show what you are, only what you've already promised to become. There is no father, daughter, or husband anymore. Only one reflection that calls itself love, and love here is a mouth that never closes. Signed only, T.A. The excavation, 1967, 100 years later, a team of restorers uncovered the Everton crypt. The mirror was still warm. One of the workers, a young woman named Clara Hensley, insisted she saw a hand pressed against the glass from the inside. When they turned the mirror to the wall, it cracked on its own. The workers quit the next morning. Their foreman wrote in his journal, she said the reflection looked just like her father. The last reflection a year later. The mirror was moved to the parish museum in York. Visitors report a faint mist on the glass each morning, shaped like a ring. If you stand close enough, you can smell lilies, heavy, sweet, decaying. At night, when the custodians pass by, the reflection sometimes shifts. It shows three figures at a distance, a man in black, a woman in white, and a priest frozen mid-blessing. They do not move until you blink. Then, for the briefest instant, all three turn toward the glass and whisper in perfect unison, "Do you take us?" The ending that never ends. There are no graves in Hollowvale anymore. The churchyard sank years ago, the soil devouring every headstone. But on clear nights, a strange shimmer passes across the valley, like moonlight on water, though no river runs there. Stand long enough and you'll see it, a reflection without a source. A mirror hung in air, and if you listen, really listen, you'll hear a faint echo as if from beneath the earth. Father. Your turn. The testimony sealed. Archivist's Note, 2025. The case file of Reverend Thomas Alcott and the Everton family remains officially classified under ecclesiastical privacy. The original mirror was never located after the York Museum fire of 1893. Unverified accounts suggest it resurfaced in a private collection, though none who claim to possess it will allow it to be photographed. The legend endures. Whoever looks into the mirror after dusk will see not their face but their relationship to the dead. Most refuse to look. A few whisper vows instead, and when the air fogs from within, they understand too late that Hollowvale was never buried. It was waiting for someone to finish the ceremony.